My guest today is Brandon Hughes, former criminal prosecutor with 2 decades of courtroom and investigative experience. For his career, Brandon has prosecuted violent crimes, solved cold cases, and stood face-to-face with some of the most dangerous individuals imaginable, all while fighting for justice and supporting victims' families. He's appeared on 48 Hours, HBO's Generation Hustle, and The Dr. Phil Show, bringing his deep legal expertise to national audiences. Now, Brandon channels that same insight into podcasts, documentaries, and investigative projects, not to sensationalize crime, but to reveal the truth behind it. He's also the author of 4 crime thrillers, The Hero Rule, The Fourth Prisoner, The Red Room, and The Wolf He Feeds, blending his real-world legal knowledge with gripping storytelling. Today, we'll dive into the psychology of criminal behavior, why cases go cold, how justice can be won or lost, and the human cost behind every verdict. Let's welcome Brandon Hughes to the show. Hey, how's it going, Brandon?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I cannot complain, man. I'm doing, I'm retired and podcasting full time, so I enjoy it.
Yeah, I'll be there with you, I hope, as a retiree.
Yeah, it is. I don't think I've still gotten used to it yet. I still wake up every Sunday thinking about what I got to do to get ready for work on Monday and realize I'm doing it.
That's awesome.
So let's get into a little bit of your background, man. What brought you into the criminal justice world?
Honestly, it was really by accident. I was a marketing major out of college and wanted to own a business, do something. One of my best friends in college says, "Hey, let's go to law school." So I was like, all right. My goal at the time was certainly not to practice law. It was more get a law degree. This is back late 90s. So my thought was, more marketable, just what the heck. 3 years later, I graduate. And throughout that time, I'd had 3 children during law school, which, will test the bounds of a lot of things. But I was working full time during the day, going to school at night. And once I got done, I thought, well, I've gone this far. Let's take the bar exam and you might as well see what happens. And I was going to church with a guy who worked at the local district attorney's office. And he just says, "Hey, they're hiring." And I said, okay. I didn't really know anything about what went on there. You watch TV shows.
Yeah.
I went and interviewed and I was offered the job on the spot, which I'll be honest, did not necessarily inflate my ego. My thought was, man, no one must want this. If they're offering me, I have no legal experience whatsoever, fresh off the bar exam. But I took it and immediately, someone once told me a long time ago that your ideal job is where your talents and your passions intersect. What I found for me was that was in the as a prosecutor in the criminal justice side.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of you won't find peace in your life until you get put on the path that you're supposed to be on, which may not necessarily be what you wanted to be on. And I discovered that as well. I wanted to own my own business as well. When I got out of the military, I started a trucking company, made good money, and I was living what I thought was my dream, but I was not happy. Since then, now that I have retired, I work my nonprofit full time for veterans, and I podcast, and I make a lot less money. I'm extremely happy. Yeah, but I'm much happier. So I do understand that part of it. So you walk in and you get hired, and it sounds like you're still kind of unsure about, man, how did this really happen? What was your expectations when you started? What was you expecting it to be versus what it really was?
I mean, when I tell you I had no expectations, I mean, that's the honest truth. I had no idea what to expect. So I showed up for my first day. And in DA's offices, there is not a lot of training. There's not a lot of, hey, getting ready. It's just, here's a file and go. Now, so the extent of my training was, and initially I was in a busier circuit. So I was assigned to district court, which handles misdemeanor cases here and where a lot of people start. And my training was, all right, here's this particular docket and you go and watch the guy who's doing it now. And so I did that. And the next day they were like, all right, it's yours. So, so it's and at the time there was a traffic docket, a DUI specific docket and a misdemeanor offense docket. So 3 days a week I'd go into court, and over time you just kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Learn baptism by fire, man. That's right. That is the way to do it. That is for sure.
And the good thing is, they're bench trials. They're not in front of juries, and you try a lot of cases. So I was going through a lot. So I was gaining a lot of experience very, very quickly.
Yeah, my son's pretty experienced with the bench trials. I've gotten to watch a few with him as growing up as a kid, doing kid stupid things. But we took him to a party, and a couple of his parents of the family that had the party, they bought alcohol for all the kids that was there. Now, we drove him there. We dropped him off, did not know that there was going to be alcohol. And the cops get called, not because the kids are out of control, because the two parents are drunk and fighting in the front yard. And so the neighbors call the cops, and obviously, there's a whole bunch of kids that have been drinking. So I got to deal with that type of stuff. But for the most part, I don't have a lot of knowledge, especially when it gets higher than that. I was really surprised the first time I went, man, because just like you said, it's like an auction, man. They just pull up the next bidder and off they go. And the two people talk real quick. The judge makes a decision, and next, The
misdemeanor court, like district court, is it's not as sexy. They don't really feature it on television or movies, right. But it's more entertaining because you get to the felony side and doing jury trials. Well, those cases are more interesting typically, but there's a lot of minutia that you do that really is fairly boring for anybody that's tried to watch like court TV or some trial on television. And there's just a lot of very mundane parts that just has to be done. But no, if you want move fast, probably laugh a little bit, and just scratch your head is like, who are these idiots? Yeah, go sit through district court. I've often said, if a local economy wanted to raise money, do a little pay-per-view channel that just shows district court live, you'd make some money, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, I would agree. So how long did you do the misdemeanor side before you moved on to bigger things?
I did that for about 2 years, and longer than typical. I think I got pegged because I was doing a good job. And the misdemeanors, it's more the DUI side, I think, for you just really want somebody, because those are very difficult cases to try. They're very technical, and there is, like I said, there is no training. So you're having on the defense side these expert lawyers. That's all they deal with, and if you constantly churn on prosecutor side, it's just such a disadvantage for that office. So it's something I had a particular passion about, and so I did that. So I was there for about 2 years until I requested to move and got moved to circuit court, which is where we handle felony level cases, jury trials, that type of thing.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I never really thought about that until you was just saying that. I can imagine that the defense attorneys, unless they're a public defender or something, probably have a better advantage because they have a smaller case hold. They're focusing on smaller amounts of cases compared to the prosecutor who's dealing with every case that comes in. So I can see, how much time they have compared to what you have to prepare would definitely make things difficult.
Yeah, particularly, like I said, especially like DUIs, that's if that's what they specialize in, then that's, so you have to get up to speed quickly for sure.
And I can imagine that's also frustrating because you're counting on other people to do their part, and then you have to basically convince everybody that everybody did their part correctly, from the traffic stop to probably the breathalyzer tests and everything else that goes along with it. Those are all things that as the prosecutor, you wasn't present for, and you're relying on other people to get those things right. So I can see how that would make it difficult as well. So you spend 2 years doing that, and then you move on to the felony side. What was the biggest change? I mean, what was the, holy crap, I didn't expect this when I moved over to here?
It's definitely jury trials. I mean, like I said, I tried a few hundred cases in front of a judge. It's very informal, but you get to that level where you're, all right, there's a jury sitting there. I think my first trial, I sat second chair with somebody who's a little older, more experienced. And there were times throughout, he said, all right, you want to get up and ask questions? I said, no, man, I'm just watching. And we would try 2, 3, 4 cases in a week, right? And we'd churn through them pretty quick. It's not like you see on television where these cases take weeks. And the second trial came, we got done with the first, and the second one came up, and he says, all right, I want you to give the opening statement. And I'd never done it. And I said, no, I'm watching. He said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not getting up. So if you don't get up, this trial ain't happening. So it's one of those things you just get up and do. And man, I got grabbed with it, and just, it's so much fun. And you hate to say that because a lot of the stuff we're dealing with is just obviously it's not good, particularly when victims involved. But man, it's a rush. It's parts theater.
Yep.
And, some people kind of have the passion for it, some don't. I think you weed those folks out pretty quick because a lot of people think they want to go in, work for a couple of years, get some experience, and move on. And you can just tell whether their heart's in it or not. But when it is, man, it's it's fun.
I can imagine it's probably something similar to like chess with adrenaline. Every move is being strategically placed. You're trying to trap the other side, so forth. At the same time, you've got that adrenaline rush from being in front of the jury, people watching, and the case riding on how you're doing. So I can imagine that.
When you talk about the adrenaline side, I mean, you have to be on the entire time. There is no opportunity to daydream, to check your phone, to do any of that, because you have to listen.
Yeah.
So, I've had week-long trials, and you get done and you felt like you have run a marathon. I mean, you're physically, mentally, you're just exhausted. And it's odd because you've just sat there. I mean, obviously you get up and ask questions and whatnot, but for the most part, it's not a very physically demanding job, obviously. But man, you try a case for 3 or 4 days or a week, and you're spent.
I can imagine. Even the jury, if they're not able to go home and they're stuck for a week long, I'm sure they're climbing the walls by the time it's over with as well. So let me ask you this then. When you get into some of these bigger cases, let's say a murder trial, right? From your office, how many people are helping you with this? I mean, somebody has to be doing the investigating side while somebody else is planning for the trial side. Is it just literally just you and detectives, or is there like a investigative lawyer team as well?
Most DA's offices do have investigators, but typically you have the investigation on the front end. And then once that's done, that's my case. I prepare it and basically I do it. Now, if I need witnesses tracked down, subpoena served like that, I'll rely, because typically the sheriff's office will serve subpoenas. Mm-hmm. But if there's somebody, say I'm having a particularly tough time tracking down or serving, we'll have investigators in our office that I can go to and say, hey, I need you to find this person. Just because the other agencies, whether it's the local police or the sheriff, they've got a lot of resources, but they've got a lot going on too. So right. Once I have it, I felt it's kind of my duty to lean on my folks to, if I need, like I said, track somebody down, go get a witness, that type of thing, because we have a lot more freedom in that realm to do that type of thing. So yeah, I would lean on them. But as far as actual case preparation, I mean, that was on me to get done.
Wow. Yeah, because I don't know if it's the hardest case, but it's probably the most publicized or watched from the outside, and that would be probably murder cases and maybe some sort of major robbery type cases. So how do you deal with that side as well? Because I mean, now you're seeing things in the paper, you're probably passing people that know you and want to talk about it. How does that part of your life kind of run into things?
I would say, first and foremost, the most difficult cases for me, just personally, and really the most difficult to prosecute are like sex assault, rape cases. They're just for very different reasons. Because, robbery is basically you got some guy put a gun in somebody's face. So those are typically some of the easier cases, honestly. Murder cases can be more difficult, but they're a little more straightforward as well. Typically, you don't get a lot of what I would call TV murder cases, really. You get that occasionally, and we've obviously dealt with those. But I think the toughest part is obviously it's, I have a job to do. And I know when I first started, my wife was a little worried about that. I had a defendant call the house one time. And not threatening, just kind of pleading this case, man, you're going to ruin blah, blah, blah. And I just told him he needed to talk to his lawyer. I hung up, called his lawyer. And then when we got in court, when it came to sentencing, I kind of let the judge know what went on, laid into the guy, and it got handled that way. My view has always been, I think the bad guys see me as me doing my job. They take it more out on their lawyers, I think. But there have been times I've been out, like I'm in a fairly small town now, and it was after a football game walking downtown, and that guy come up and just says, hey, man, I know who you are. And I was like, all right, who are you? I mean, whatever, just and kind of deal with it. But that's just part of it. I've never worried, but it is interesting to go in a store, and I say interesting. I have a look at it on the lighter side of a lot of this stuff. I mean, it is what it is. We're not splitting the atom here. We're doing very important work.
Yeah.
But like I said, we're dealing with what we're dealing with. So, we'll go out and I'll see somebody. My wife was talking to somebody at some store, and I said, she stabbed her boyfriend in the face like 10 times. So you know who you're talking to, that type of thing. But it makes things interesting for sure.
I can imagine. When I got out of the military, I really didn't know what I was going to do, to be honest. I opened that trucking company out of force, not necessarily following my dreams. And that was because I couldn't find a job. It was just a bad time. And I lived in a small town. The one thing that we did have was we had a federal prison. And the only thing I did know was I didn't want to work there. And the reason was because I'd seen enough evil, negative stuff in the 68 months that I spent deployed. I didn't really care to see that in my hometown as well, and walk past a whole bunch of people that got out and know what they did and where they were at. So I do understand that part of it, but there has to be a side where you come across these cases and it becomes a little bit personal. I just don't know how I could look at a sex offender, especially to a minor or a rape person, and not let my personal feelings get involved as well. It has to be tough to stay objective.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're not objective. I mean, we're here to prosecute. I mean, our job's not to be objective. It's not, because it's not supposed to be. I take it more personal than most, and I guess the best way to explain that is, if I get to the point that we've indicted, because I do all my work on the front end to make sure. Because if I've got a doubt as to someone's guilt or innocence as I'm preparing the case for grand jury, I mean, I'm not going to move forward with it. I'll let the grand jury know that, right? Because if I can't get it past the grand jury with a lower, with just reasonable, preponderance of the evidence versus, probable cause versus reasonable doubt, I've got no chance in front of a jury. Yeah. So by the time it gets indicted and I've done all the work, look, they're guilty, right? And so at that point, it is a zero-sum game. Now, if there's something we can work out, and depending on their history, the crime, and all that stuff, then so be it. But once we get into trial, I mean, look, man, my job is to win. My job is to convict you. That's it. I don't handle the sentencing. That's up to the judge, but my job is to convict you. So, yeah, I do take it, and it's like I told prosecutors that work for me. I said, hey, this, to lose a case shouldn't ruin your week, shouldn't ruin your month. But if it doesn't bother you, you're in the wrong place. I mean, if it just doesn't, and there's a lot of them that it just doesn't bother. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. They're able to keep that separation. When I'm doing this job, and when I'm done, I'm moving on to the next thing. But I've never been wired that way.
Yeah.
Because, if there's a victim out there that's not satisfied and not happy, or that's a family that's just, they've looked to me to do this. And so, I have to deliver for them. So no, it hurts to lose a case for sure. And just the personal aspect of not just the aspect of losing, but you've let some people down, and that's very, very hard.
Yeah. I think that would probably be one of the things that would bother me as well, is especially, I got kids as well. I got a daughter and I got a son, and I couldn't even imagine if some of the stuff, especially the stuff you see on TV, ever actually happened to them. So yeah, I think it would be a double-edged sword. I would find myself taking those kind of crimes personal and probably beat myself down if I did lose. So I do get the whole checks and balances and dotting the I's, especially for something that is going to be a tough case, like a sexual assault or something.
And I would say the one case that, there are cases that kind of hang me a little bit, but there's one I think about probably every week. I don't know, it's been years ago, but it was a rape case and we lost it. And I knew it was going to be very tough on the front end. And again, it's just amazing how juries view people. And, you call somebody a murderer, people say, okay, yeah. You call somebody a rapist, people are like, hold on a second. Yep. It's just a different animal. And it's just a particular case I lost. And I would say weekly at some point, I'll think about that. What could I have done differently? It hurts. And when you see the toll it's taken on the victim, those are very hard, but, it's what we ask for, what we do. And, but just, it does stay.
Yeah, I can relate to that. That's a problem that we have on the military side. I think the military side tries to bury things more than confront them, probably because they do know how hard it is, and they do know the lifestyle of soldiers. They like to party, they like to drink, they do crazy things to unwind, and that probably doesn't make the trial any easier when you're dealing with a he said, she said type situation. But I have also had guests on here that it had happened to them, and they're still dealing with it because they didn't get that justice. So that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, and it should bother somebody. I would agree with you. That's probably good advice that you're giving the younger attorneys as well. If not, it seems to me you kind of have to have that type A personality to be good at this. And I think if you don't have that competition and desire to win, it's going to affect your performance.
Without question.
So how long were you with the DA's office? Are you still there, or did you move on to like consulting or something after that?
I was a prosecutor all told about a little over 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is, obviously you said that one rape case, but what are some of the cases that just stick with you, as far as not necessarily that you lost, but you're just shaking your head like, how could this happen?
Probably one of my first really just kind of got me is it was a drunk driving case. It was a young couple. They had just graduated from Auburn University, so they were kind of getting ready to start their lives, and they had grown up knowing each other. I mean, since they were little, they had grown up neighbors. They kind of blossomed into kind of a boyfriend girlfriend situation, and they went to a Braves game one night and had an opportunity to stay with some friends. Obviously, been drinking at the game. They went out later drinking. They had the opportunity to stay with some friends in Atlanta. The boyfriend who was driving said, "No, we're going to go back home." They get just inside the county line, which is about they were probably an hour and 20 minutes from Atlanta, probably another 45 minutes from home. And he just goes off a bridge, and he survives, which is what happens. The drunk lives, the girlfriend dies. And what was so hard about that particular case was the mother. I talked to her daily leading up to the trial. He ended up pleading guilty as charged, and just what we call a blind plea. In other words, he just pled as he was charged, and it was up to the judge he just put his basically faith in the judge's hands to sentence. And I think he got a maximum sentence on that one. But then I continued to speak to the mother about every other day. And every time I got off the phone with her, I just told my wife, she's not going to make it. I don't know how she's still, because her daughter was her world. And it was a few months after, on Christmas Day, I got a call from her sister that she had taken her life. And it was not a surprise, but that's the toll these things take. Yeah. And that's one, obviously, that sits with me. And but typically the ones that sit are the homicides where somebody's a younger person, because most of the homicides we deal with, I would say on a nationwide basis, are just one bad guy shooting another bad guy. They're all kind of doing something bad, but it's the ones where they're truly, truly innocent. And as you start digging in and you see the decisions that are made on both sides, the choices, and those are the ones that tend to stick. Anaya Blanchard was one. That was one that was a fairly national case, but just, man, you talk about taking too early and just evil incarnate, the person that is charged with her murder. Yeah. Just really, really bad stuff. And it's just, to your point, it's so senseless. I mean, it's just so senseless. Like sitting across from a couple of guys who are at a party and decide they want to rob the guy who owned the house. When the senses of a trailer, they shoot him. And it's like, man, this guy's got nothing. Your life is over now. You've killed somebody. Your lives are over. You were never going to get anything. Yeah. Those are the types of things that drive me crazy. That I want to look at and say, man, what were you thinking? Yeah. But you can't do that because there is no explanation, because they're not thinking. And that's the tough part.
Yeah. Sometimes that drives me nuts too. I've had soldiers that just done stupid things, not necessarily that serious, but you're like, where did this come from? Where did this go from sitting in the barracks to drag racing down the road through a town that's supposed to be 35 and you don't even remember going through the town? Yeah. I had soldiers call me from standing inside a swamp saying that the cops were going to shoot him because he tried to outrun them and crashed and jumped out and ran into the swamp, and the cops, this is down in Hinesville, Fort Stewart. And he calls me and he's like, what should I do? I said, well, turn yourself in before they
put your hands up. Come out.
Yeah. Then I ended up getting him out of jail. Never, the stuff that you see on TV. Yeah. And it's hard when you follow the news because there's no context behind it. It's just, 30-second show of increase of, how you went from, I recently, the guy that was on the news about having a kid or wasn't on the news. I seen it on YouTube. Sorry. He had a kid, a girlfriend, and then they split up, and then he killed her and shot his brother. And it was over an argument, and they weren't even together no more. He killed his baby that was still not born yet. And it just makes you wonder, like, what are you thinking? Where does that just pop through your mind? I mean, I'm sure you didn't go over there thinking about killing her, but how did you leave killing her? It's just, that was the part that always fascinated me with the psychology part of, what makes a person, one, obviously you already have to have the ability to be able to do it. So that has to come from somewhere else. And then you have to have the thought process to do it. So yeah, it is crazy. And like you said, there's so many times where you find out somebody got killed and robbed and they got $50 or $75. And you're just like, man, you'd been better off to attempt a bank robbery, and at least try to get something out of it than that guy that's walking down the street.
And that's the typical robbery. They go and a sandwich shop or something, and as soon as they get a couple $100, they leave, call the police, give a description of the vehicle gets pulled over, and they're in prison for minimum, 5 years to serve. I mean, it's just a note, that's where we are. That's what they choose to do. And that's what we deal with. So be it.
Yeah. I remember a story, me and a buddy of mine, while we were in the military, we both worked at a pizza shop after work because, soldiers make so much money. So for hobby, we went and made pizzas at Pizza Hut, but he delivered is what he did. And we had an area in Savannah that we didn't deliver to after the sun went down for obvious reasons. And it was getting close to that time frame. He delivered to a house, and the lady answered the door, paid for the pizza. When he walked down the steps, like 3 guys came out from behind the bushes of the house, pistol whipped him with a pistol, and took all the money that he had on him, which was everything that he had done from his deliveries, and then walked in the house that he just delivered the pizza to. And I'm like, man, that is ballsy. You literally just do not give a shit.
And that's the thing too, in these small towns, like you'll see somebody will shoot somebody and then they'll show up later. And it's like, they know who you are. They know where you live. And these communities, they talk and they just show up at their house and they kill them. I mean, it's just like, to your point, man, what are you doing here? You know the guy you're putting the gun in the face of. And, but yeah, I mean, it's just, to your point, if you try to think about it and try to figure it out, you go crazy.
Yeah, I've had no luck, that's for sure. So what is one of the toughest cases that you came across where you knew that person was guilty, but it was just so hard to prove it? For whatever reason, luck or YouTube, they figured out how to do it semi-correctly, and it just drove you nuts trying to get to the bottom of it.
I don't know that I've had one that falls necessarily like exclusively in that category, but you do have the cases to where the tough part is when I guess maybe this is what you're at, who did it. Yeah. You're just trying to connect those dots. Now, there is a case that's been unsolved here in the area for a couple decades, but it's one where we're like 90% sure where we know who did it. Now, there's been several iterations of that suspects throughout time, but we've really narrowed it down. But I don't know that you'll ever get that person because, the one eyewitness, or this is more of an ear witness, I guess, that could really place that person there is dead now. So that person's statement, and it wasn't necessarily in and of itself just a linchpin, but it was very, very good evidence that led to some other evidence. But that's one that you sit back and say, man, well, unless somebody steps up, and we've made a run at this person before, and kind of a long story, but I don't know that will ever happen. When I mentioned earlier with Anaya, that was tough because she was missing for several weeks, and just trying to find her. And again, we had a really viable suspect. But first of all, how do we identify this person? I mean, we have some video that we think, all right, this person's probably it. Mm-hmm. Now we got to know who this is. But then once we dial in on that and we make an arrest in this particular case, arrest for kidnapping, because we were confident that he abducted based on some eyewitnesses and other evidence. But then you still got to find her because we know she's dead somewhere, and we've got to figure this thing out. So again, you're talking to people, interviewing people, and it's frustrating because throughout that process, when we get somebody who was able to speak up and we're able to start piecing some of this stuff together, where we're like, well, if we would have known this information, we talked to the people we were supposed to talk to, but they lied to us. Yeah. And had they been truthful on the front end, we probably would have gotten this person on video with this girl's body. So, but by the time we get around to it and we learn this stuff, well, the video's gone. So it's a lot of that you bang your head against that, maybe you ultimately solve it. Man, there's just so much more we could have had. And then it just becomes a different case.
I can imagine that's the type of stuff that leads to cases becoming cold cases. Not necessarily closed, but just you're now at a loss of what it is that you're going to be able to do and how to be able to do it. So I think that makes sense. Would you say a lot of those become like one-off situations, not necessarily like serial killers that are going to continue to keep killing or guys that are continuously robbing, but a lot of your cold cases are maybe a crime of passion or something that happened one time. The guy doesn't necessarily go around looking to kill people. But because it was a one-off situation, it makes it even tougher.
Well, it's interesting because probably the most intriguing cold case I dealt with was a case that was, again, about 12 years old. We just opened it back up. And it was at the time the police had a very, very good suspect. And cases go cold for a myriad of reasons. But typically, or oftentimes, they may say, look, we know who, or we have a very strong belief who did it, but knowing and proving are two different things. And if you move forward too quickly and you can't prove it, well, now jeopardy's attached and they can never be captured. So in this particular instance, the police had a very good suspect. They couldn't quite get what they needed. And that was at the time, the people he was hanging with and friends with, they were younger. It was just a much different dynamic on who's willing to talk to the police, what are they willing to say. you fast forward 12, 15 years, everybody's grown up. So now you have people who maybe were reluctant to talk. Well, they're grown now. Maybe they're married. Maybe they have children. Their perspective on life is different. They start talking, and you can start piecing things together. And, that's why you take a run at cases. In this particular case, there was a piece of evidence that, goodness, just happened to be picked up. But there were multiple crime scenes involved, but just happened to be picked up by an alert police officer. There was no real reason he picked it up. He just thought it was a cigarette butt. He just thought it was a little out of the ordinary, held on to it. Well, as we move forward, really after we made the case and after we got the indictment, after we made the arrest, we said, hey, let's get this checked. And the DNA matched the bad guy, and it was in a spot where his DNA should not have been. So, it's just, there's some, I don't want to say luck, because, hard work puts you in position to do things. But sometimes cases go cold. The ball doesn't bounce your way. And those are frustrating. But, to your point about, a multiple murderer versus a one-off, in this particular case, this guy had killed. I mean, it's very bizarre. You could do a whole other show because we could talk about this for a couple of hours. But this guy had killed his parents when he was a young boy. And we believe almost certainly there are other bodies that he can be linked to. Nothing to prove that, but just based on history and just some time frames that have crossed, we believe that. But to your point, the tough cases are when because typically there's a motive to some degree, like this guy. Yep. He was showing this girl attention. They were friends. She didn't want to have anything to do with him on a romantic level, and he killed her. But we've got a case right now that probably will never get solved. They had 2 kids in a trailer playing video games. Bullet comes in, hits one of them in the head. He's dead. Now, what I think probably happened is some guy was somewhere in the trailer park, shot a gun. The bullet happened to go all the way and find this kid. Wow. I don't think it was anything intentional. It's just somebody screwing around. Yeah. And unless somebody was with him when he shot the gun, is willing to come forward. I mean, that case, there is zero chance that case gets solved. Zero. I
mean, that sounds similar to the drunk that drove over the side of the bridge. He didn't intend to do it. It was an accident. But he put himself in a situation where that became feasible to happen by drinking and driving.
That's right.
Sounds like the same situation. Somebody was out playing around with a gun and wanted to shoot it and didn't use proper safety or look at the backstop or look past where they're shooting at to see what it could potentially hit. And at that point, again, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't sound like the person that shot the gun would ever come forward and say, no, I did it. And you probably have to have some sort of, reasonable doubt to go through the trailer park and start searching every single trailer to find a gun that would match the bullet. So I don't think that's feasible. So I can imagine how tough that would be. I think also a good portion.
That person may not have realized they shot anybody. They just pulled the trigger on the gun and walked off and, whatever. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is another part, and it's not the sexy side of the work, but I think another part that strongly affects you is the PSYOP side. The military uses PSYOPs with a team to go out and talk to kids and try to become friends with the local nationals and to gather intel and information. And I think the same comes along with your police departments. If that PSYOPs team's not doing a good job keeping public relations tied together, this makes your job even that much harder because now, again, like you said, people are not willing to talk to you for whatever reasons. I've learned that the majority of the reasons are usually just conspiracy theory based and uneducated type situations. Not every police department is crooked and not every person is going out there looking to make a buck by some sort of scam as in the court systems. That does seem to be a problem in areas is the lack of trust. So how do you deal with that side of it? There's just no way to force somebody to talk, but man,
obviously there's not. I mean, one of the things that you try to stress is, the only time people see police shouldn't be when there's something bad going on.
Right.
So,
I agree.
And we're blessed with police departments that do a good job of community involvement. And it's interesting because the detectives, especially the drug guys, stuff like that, look, the folks in the communities where a lot of this crime is happening, they know who they are, right? They know who the police are. And so if somebody gets shot in the street and you've got the crime scene set up and everybody's, you've got 100 people coming out of their houses and apartments and looking, well, nobody's going to go up to the police in front of them and say, hey, I know who did it. So right. A lot of that work typically comes, we'll get on the scene, assess everything, gather the evidence, take pictures, video, whatever. We'll interview people. But it's typically after the fact. Let's get back to the police station as we're working through. Phone calls start coming in. saying, hey, talk to this person, talk to that person. And the frustrating thing is when you, and I've had this, you get shot in the head when he and his girlfriend obviously saw who did it because she was with him. And she says, he's the guy. Months pass, sometimes years pass by the time a trial comes up and people in the community talk and you get this person on the stand and she says, oh no, I didn't see it. That's what's tough. Yeah. And because this somebody who's this murderer is going to walk because they're not willing. And it's it's easy for me to say, hey, I don't have to live in that.
Right.
And this person does, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating. And you try to make these assurances. And in this particular instance, we had her, I think the night before she was supposed to testify, we went and picked her up, had her put in a local hotel while we're in there checking her in. Well, associated with the other bad guy walks in. Now, I don't think he was following her. It may have been happenstance, but from that point, man, she was, as you can imagine, scared to death.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
Right. So we ended up taking her out of the county, whatever, but it's, they still have to take the stand. They still have to point the finger. And that's not always easy.
Yeah. I mean, that is a big ask, when somebody's in that situation, they have to determine whether they want to survive and worry about themselves or put their faith in you that you're going to win and he is going to go to jail and there isn't going to be any other repercussions from somebody that didn't go to jail. So yeah, there is a lot to consider with that. I think one of the things that kind of does fascinate me lately is juvenile cases that are serious. You can search YouTube and there's a lot of, I don't remember the channel, but there's a channel that does nothing but show the police interrogation, right? It doesn't really show the whole crime. The focus is when they have the person in there and the investigation and the interrogation's going on. But a lot of them are kids, like you said, that shot parents and so forth. Do you think that's becoming more now or just more publicized than in the past? Because, I am really convinced that there is definitely a mental health crisis in this country. And it just makes me wonder if drugs and stuff like that are affecting thought process is changing things. Kids are getting more violent.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think obviously we're exposed to what's happening a lot more now than maybe before. To your point, I think there's absolutely a lot of mental health issues that aren't being addressed. I think it's impulse control. I think if you look down to the science of it, a child's brain is not fully formed until
25.
Yeah, and I think the last forming parts have to do with judgment and decision making. So I do think there is that aspect of, they do something. It's impulse control. They do something without thinking. But what I don't believe is I don't believe people are doing this or these kids are doing this because they don't know the difference between. They know what they're doing.
Right. Yep.
And a lot of it is in their environment. We had a shooting case one time, and there's just a lot of kids, I would say between 13 and 16, 17 years old gathered. Talking 30 or 40. Well, car rolls up, the kid gets out, and he's got a gun in his hand, and he eventually shoots somebody. Now, to me, and it was on video, all on security camera from other businesses, but to me, the alarming part was not the murder. The alarming part, and you would know this as someone who's handled guns for a very large portion of your lifetime, the fact that this kid gets out of a car holding a handgun, nobody bats an eye. Nobody runs. Nobody looks twice. Nobody backs up. Nobody gives room. It's just so commonplace to have a gun in these communities that they see one. It just doesn't faze them. I assure you, if you and I were in the same room, even just having a friendly chat, if I took a pistol out and put it on the table, the temperature of the room would go up a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Even if you don't perceive me as a threat, there's a gun. But these folks, man, they pull it out, walk around with it, and it means nothing. That's alarming.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah, I have enough guns that, well, I'll have to edit that out. I have enough guns, I could put a gun in every single room. I have guns that I carry in the wintertime when I can wear pants, and I have guns that I can put in my pocket. I carry a concealed carry license, and I will be honest, very rarely do I even carry a gun. I've got the ability to. I just, living in I'm right now, I live in Rolla, Missouri. It's not a major town. Probably the biggest crimes is some college kids drinking and fighting or some meth deals or something going on. But this ain't like murder capital. I don't feel the need to have to carry a gun everywhere. And I think that deciphers a lot of people's judgment. Some people can say that they don't never know when they're going to need it, so they carry it. And I can get along with that. That's fine. But if I did see a kid that was under the age of 18, 21, holding a pistol, yeah, that's definitely alarming because he's not legally able to have it, and which means he either stole it or somebody gave it to him or something, but it's not leading to a good reason, whatever the case is. And like you said, our brains aren't formed until much later anyway, so you can't count on judgment being done there either. So, and I had that issue with my son. Now that you bring that up, I being around guns, I've taught my kids gun safety and everything else. And my son did go down the wrong path for a while. He was old enough to have guns. I never bought him a gun and gave it to him until he was of age, but he got along with the wrong crowd and he stopped securing it and somebody stole it. And his guns became involved in a shooting. I know it wasn't him because as soon as the guns came up missing, he reported them stolen, which I'm glad he did the right thing. So there was a police report 6 months before the shooting that happened. But it still happened because he did not secure his weapons. At the end result, it put guns on the street. So I do get that. It is tough to balance that right to carry versus common sense to carry. And I don't think there's a law that's ever going to fix that part of it. But yeah, I think the big situation recently was what was the 18-year-old kid's name that had the AR that went out in the middle of the riots and he got off. I can't remember his name, but again, I have questions about
Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, I have questions. I don't think that he got off necessarily because he was completely innocent or shouldn't have had some sort of legal problems. I think the other side just did such a piss poor job trying it that it worked for him. But again, being a soldier, I'm not going to go grab a gun and go walking through a middle of a riot just because I think that I can.
Right.
It makes me wonder, what was he even doing out there? What was the thought process? Well, there wasn't one. So yeah, it is frustrating with the youth nowadays. And I think juvenile cases have got to be tough, man, because, regardless of the heinous crime that kid did, you still see there's a whole life ahead of him that is now gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's to give you an idea of how the juvenile system works is the purpose behind juvenile justice is different from the adult system. And the adult system obviously is very much punishment oriented, whereas the juvenile system, to your point, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yep.
However, and so a lot of what goes on is really the judge in a juvenile case holds a lot of sway and a lot of power, because let's say you get a juvenile that goes out, and I would assume most states have, we have a law here in Alabama, and I would assume most states do that. If a juvenile commits, say, an A felony or a gun crime, well, it's automatically sent to adult court. Like you can't say, no, we're going to deal with it this way. It has to go to adult court. Now, there are, outside of that, if you've got a juvenile that gets a crime, and let's say they have a laundry list of crimes, and these, they're 16, 17, whatever, and they've just got 40 crimes. Well, you can go to the judge and say, look, this kid has had his opportunity in juvenile court. We're asked that you send this up to adult court because the juvenile system is too limited. This kid is a dangerous person.
Right.
And this isn't working. Send him to adult court where we can really do some stuff. And sometimes the judge will say yes. Sometimes the judge will say no. But for instance, we had a kid going around town and he was punching people in the back of the head and taking their money. Now, to me, that's a psychopath.
Yeah.
That for someone to put a gun in somebody's face, I think anybody that just doesn't take a lot of bravery, right?
Right.
That you don't even have to be particularly mean. You just I got a gun. I want what you have. But to go and punch somebody and that, to me, is someone on a different level. And that is somebody who is going to kill someone one day. I mean, that is a violent person that needs to be removed from society. So that's somebody who would say, look, Judge, I know this is a first offense, and it doesn't necessarily fit the qualifiers to automatically send it to adult court, but you need to send it up because we need to nip this like right now.
Yeah.
So it's those types of things. And hopefully you've got a judge that sees it your way. But, the judge's job isn't to agree with me. The judge's job is to exercise their judgment. So, so the juvenile system is different from the adult system. And there's a lot of moving parts in there on how well it can work. Now, a good judge can certainly, and again, you want to save these kids for sure. Some of them, I mean, you just hope you're not working so hard to save them that they do something so bad.
Right.
That, we could have prevented that. But then again, that's, the system is what it is when we work within the bounds of it.
Yeah, man. That is definitely a tough situation. So with this career, I know you have also became an author And I want to dig into that side of it. First of all, what was it that made you decide to start releasing books? I've released one myself personally, and I did not anticipate the work that it takes to publish a book. It is not easy. So somebody that does it once and then continues to do it, my hat's off, because, man, that is a job. You have to be passionate. You're not going to get rich from doing it, And so my question is what brought you to that point to where you decided, I'm gonna start writing as well?
Well, with my initial book and with a couple others, I generally had an idea in my head, just what if, these what if scenarios and like to your point, like writing a book, talking about writing 100,000 words is a daunting task if you look at it that way. So I sat on it for a while and never really gave it much thought. And I'm a pretty voracious reader, and I read in the genre that, thriller, police procedural, mystery, that type thing. And it just drives me crazy how bad writers get it. Like when they describe something or how the police act or talk or the judge, I'm just like, it's so bad. It's like if you'd have just done a couple of simple searches, so I said, you know what, if these people are going to be successful writing this, and I said, let me, put my money where my mouth is, right? Let's see if I can do it. And I went in it and probably the one thing I wanted to stand on was it's going to be accurate, right? The police are going to talk, it may not be pretty, and who knows, it may not turn out to be the best story, but it's going to be authentic over everything else. It's going to be an authentic story. If I've got to get from point A to point D with some evidence, I'm not going A to D. I'm going to show B and I'm going to show C. And that therein lies, that's what makes it difficult, right? Because you've got to, you can have the most interesting story or twist or whatever, but to me, if it doesn't make sense, then what's the point? So I just sat down and it took me, I say 10 years between the time I started till the time I published it. Now, there was a lot of years it just sat, but as you know, you finally pick it up, and then you pick it up after a while. Well, you got to start at the beginning and read it, because I'm like, all right, I've kind of forgotten what happened. And that turned into the hero rule. And then from there, I had a couple other ideas, and it turned into, that's when I wrote The Fourth Prisoner. And three of those books are as part of a series. They can be read standalone. There's no spoilers. In other words, there's nothing to say, well, I have to have read the first one and I'm going to understand the second one and on. And, the hero rule, the Fourth Prisoner, and The Wolf He Feeds, my latest, are all in the series. But in between all those was a book called The Red Room. I mean, I literally woke up in the middle of the night, had this idea. It was a pretty dark, and that book's a little different from the rest. It's a little darker. It's about the dark web, and it's a thriller and police procedural. I dialed it back a lot. I mean, my original idea was pretty dark, and I just didn't want to go do that with it. But you just have an idea. Now I'm trying to figure out, all right, now what's my next thing? I had a filmmaker reach out about the Red Room, not to create a film, but just, he's a filmmaker. He read it. He said, look, I read it in one sitting. I just want to let you know, I think this is really, really good. It's very cinematic. So I've set off now doing a screenplay of that, and just kind of working with him, getting that written. So, just stuff to stay busy and pass the time.
Yeah. That is cool. The first book I wrote was about me. It was about my time in the military and dealing with PTSD when I got out. And it wasn't so much about me as much as my choices. I didn't write it as a book. I originally wrote it for my kids and my wife, because they're the ones that were completely left out of this. They never knew anything that went on. When they seen problems and they would ask me what's wrong, or my wife would see that I had a bad dream, she would ask me what it was. And I always said it was nothing. I don't remember, whatever. Right. But then when I was spiraling and going downhill, I found myself getting angry at my family because they didn't understand what I was going through. Well, that was my fault because I never told them. So I wrote this to give them context of how things have been. Me and my wife been together since 7th grade. So she knew me as a kid. July was our 30th anniversary. We got married right out of high school. So she's known me before and after. If anybody could see a change, it would have been her. And so I wrote this as a manuscript for them to just get answers. I didn't want to have a conversation. I just wanted to tell them the truth about how things went and let them take it from there. My daughter convinced me to write it. And again, at that point, now that means I'm going back and having to add context to every situation, because I didn't have to do that with my kids. They knew what Germany was like. They were with us in Germany, they knew what the deployments was like because they lived it. But now you've got family members that can't relate to that. And so it was more about soldiers not giving that, making that choice of whether you tell your family and talk about it or you keep it bottled up. And yeah, it took me years. there was just times I would get into it and things would be going on in my life, and I just couldn't deal with reliving those events again and have to put it down. So I get that. I'm currently writing a book. It's fiction, but I've had this thought. I am into the paranormal type things as well. I like things that are unexplainable. I love science and that type of stuff. So I'm writing a book about the phrase. I'm sure even the police department uses that phrase. He lost his battle to demons, or he's fighting demons. And this book I'm writing now is a fictional book about what if they're not mental demons? What if something did attach themselves to us and is making us relive these guilts to wear us down? So it's about some homeless veterans that realize that it's not a mental problem, and just nobody believes them, and they go through that process. And that just came to me as a one day, just sitting there daydreaming. That idea came to me, and so that's the book I'm currently writing. But it is daunting, and like you said, the 100,000 words is hard. But it's the rereading it 6 times when you go through the editing process that's really hard. And that's where I'm at now with the second book. So
yeah, well, God bless you for writing the first one. I know if you need it or your family needs it, man, I can't imagine how many former soldiers and their families need to read it. So, man, I hope you have tremendous success and people see it, because it sounds like something that needs to be, they need to read, but to understand. But to your point, you go from, hey, I like the book, then you read it so many times, you're like, I can't tell if it's terrible or if it's good. I've read it so much, but you just do it, you trust it, and you rate it and you rewrite it and have other people read it. And at the end of the day, no matter if one person buys it or a million, you've sat down and you've put together 60,000, 70, however many words, you've done that and made a coherent story. And that's not easy. That's very, very difficult. And how many people do you know that probably said, oh, hey, you wrote a book? I've always wanted to do that.
Yep.
That's kind of how it was with law school. I said, I didn't want to be one of those that looks back 20 years from now and say, I wish I'd have done that. When it came to writing, right, wrong, or indifferent, we've published books, and I think they're good books and they're good stories, and people enjoy them. And, you certainly can't, no one can take that away from you. And that's pretty good.
I like the way you presented the book about when you wrote, you wanted it to be not necessarily a realistic story, with real events or real people, but the procedures and the things that happened were true. The police wasn't talking like a 1960s private detective. He was talking the way a regular cop would. And I think, for being on the military side, we do the same thing when we watch military movies. We're picking the uniforms apart and everything else. The other side to that is, in a way, that's also still documenting your story, whether it be a fictional story or not. You're documenting policies and procedures and training tactics and everything else that we're doing in our time frame. And that is, the big part of what my nonprofit is about us documenting our stories, because we just learned recently, we don't know what's going to be taught about us in 30 years, 40 years from now. We don't know what the history books are going to say, particularly about our war or how the police handled certain situations. All of those are out of our control. But if they're documented, at least people that really want to know the thought process can read a book like yours or listen to this podcast and the conversations that we're having right now. And I think those are all very important things that need to be done. Is everybody has a story, and that's what the platform is about, is about telling your story. At the same time, me picking people that I find interesting to hear the story, but it is important that everybody tells a story, because everybody has one.
That's a great point, and we're in a day and age where it's easier than ever to get that down.
Yeah. I mean, you've got now, especially with AI. I mean, you don't have to know how the format of the book works. You can jot it down and type it down and give it to some sort of AI, and they'll format it for you. So it's even easier now. I mean, can you imagine 100,000 words off of a typewriter? I can't.
My dad wrote a couple of books on the word processor. It was type a few words, hit a button, it types it. Now, they were terrible books full of spelling, grammar errors, but still you think back in the 50 years ago when there was no computer, you're right, it was on a typewriter, or 200 years. One of my favorite books is Treasure Island, and it was written in the 1600s. And I mean, that's quill and ink, I guess. I mean, that's, and you mess up one thing or a paper burns or you lose it. I mean, you're done. So, and like writing the screenplay is a whole different animal from writing it. I mean, I had no clue what I was doing when I got in it. I've learned a little bit. Obviously, I have a ton to learn, but luckily I've got a program that I use that I write in, but it has a screenplay feature that keeps it because that is very strict formatting. Yeah. I mean, it's not so much just knowing how to write or knowing what to write, but it's logistically how to do it. And there's a lot that goes on, and it's hard, but it's rewarding.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like podcasting, man. I really relate to it. And I feel, I always have authors. If an author reaches out to me and wants to be on to publicize their book, very rarely do I ever say no, because I know what they went through to get to that stage. And I think it's important that we realize that what you're seeing isn't people getting rich. You're literally seeing people pouring their feelings and their hearts and their stories out because they want other people to know it. And I think that's a big thing. That's a big misnomer about podcasting. Everybody thinks because you have a podcast, you're Joe Rogan and you're a millionaire.
Right.
And the truth is I don't even monetize my stuff. So, I don't make anything for doing these shows. I do them because I'm passionate about it and I enjoy it. And that's the part that people need to understand when they're reading a book. Good, bad, or indifferent, somebody took the time to put their heart into it and do it. And I think that is a big thing. At the end of the day, I think people need to get back to those days where they spend more than 3 seconds decision-making processes, scroll or watch. That's the decision-making process. And,
right. It's a microwave society if there ever was one right now.
It is, and that's one thing that I pray to change. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but something that reminds me, and it's always stuck with me, is I've been doing this now for 3 years. So I've had a lot of guests, and I had a guy come on that spoke about AI, and I really thought we were going to go down a different road, and he shocked me. I asked him, I said, where do you think AI is going to put us in the world? And he said, to be honest, he said, it's going to put us to the point where we are back to knowing our neighbors and talking to people versus being on a screen or texting and so forth. And I said, well, that don't make no sense. If anything, it's now easier to do that. I don't even have to complete the whole sentence. You send me a text, AI is going to respond to it. And he said, exactly. He said, because when the internet came forth, we believed everything. And now with the internet, we've gotten to the point where we don't necessarily believe everything that we see on the internet because we've learned it's not true. And he said, AI is going to make that even worse. He said, videos with fake deeps are going to get to the point where you can't tell whether that's a real person or not. And the only way you're going to know if what you're seeing is real is by physically talking to somebody in person. And I was like, well, that's an interesting point. I don't know if that'll happen, but it is an interesting point, especially coming from a guy that his career is based off of creating AIs. I mean, it was an interesting thought that he's saying that we're going to make so many fakes that people are going to go back to knowing their neighbors.
Just like the heck with computers. But you're right, man. You see stuff out there, and my wife's all the time, well, I think that's AI. Sometimes it's obvious. I'm like, no, this is real. She's like, I think that's AI.
Yeah. Well,
She's definitely a skeptic. She is definitely a skeptic.
I don't blame her. I use AI for a lot of stuff. I mean, we have a radio station with our nonprofit, and I have DJs that go from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and not one of them's real. I've created every single one of them. They're all AI.
How cool is that? That is so cool.
And so I do get it. I completely understand. I write the scripts and I create the jingles and I upload them, and they
see, that's harmless. You're just entertained, but it's the stuff that people put out that they want people to believe is real. That's the scary part.
Yeah. Well, Joe Rogan, like he said, he has more commercials that he never did that he's in than he does that he actually did. And that's because there's so much of his voice and video footage out there. I mean, he's like over almost 4,000 episodes just in his podcast. So there's probably every letter and every vowel and every accent that you could pull from that and copy it. But there's so many people on YouTube that have him advertising their products that he never did. But yeah. Well, I'm going to give you this opportunity, Brandon, to come forward and tell everybody where they can buy your books and where they can find out and follow you and do more. And then I will also make sure that all that stuff gets put in the final edits and makes it easy for the viewers to find it.
Yeah, no, I mean, lastly, I appreciate you having me. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. I hate, an hour is all we've got, but my website is brandonhughesbooks.com. And all the books are available on Amazon, and they're also in the Kindle Unlimited library. So if you belong to Kindle Unlimited, you can read the Kindle versions free of charge. So I hope you give them a read and give them a review. I'm proud of the work I did. I think they're really good, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Well, I'm going to go and throw the exit video out. I appreciate you coming on, Brandon. This is, like you said, we could have another episode and probably go another 2 or 3 hours. It is definitely a fascinating topic, and it's no wonder why true crime podcasts are usually the number one watch podcast, because there is fascination behind it.
There is. And again, that's a whole nother conversation. If you want to know my opinion on some of these podcasts and the impact they have on, that person's guilty or that person's not guilty, let them out of jail. We can, that's a whole nother conversation.
You mean there's a chance that the 1,500 people that were pardoned from Biden, some of them were actually guilty? No way.
I'm thinking about like the serial with the Adnan Syed and making a murderer, and everybody goes, well, they're not guilty. I'm like, let me tell you something. You know who found them guilty? The jury, who heard every word, every piece of evidence, every bit of testimony. They determined they were guilty. Yep. Not the people that listened to a podcast or watched a Netflix documentary where they cherry picked. And I know we got to go, but just that one part of making a murder where they find the tube of blood and they freak out because there's a hole in the top. And I'm like, guess what? How do you think forensics gets the blood out to test it? They put a needle. Of course but they make it seem like, it's so nefarious. There's a hole in the stopper. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. I know it's supposed to be entertainment. And I'm watching them. But when the people just lose their mind going, they got railroaded, they're not guilty. I'm like, the body was in the trunk. This guy helped this guy. I've been around it enough. This is what happened. Move on. But you know what? I'm glad there's content out there. But again, different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And you see it in all these comments and messages and everything else, especially on the high profile cases. Everybody has an opinion. And I think a lot of that comes from, everybody has picked a camp. If you're a Fox News guy, you're definitely not a CNN guy, and vice versa. And our media system out there has gotten to the point where they don't necessarily tell you the story. They tell you their opinion. And I think that's good for us podcasters. So I hope they continue to do it, because it has drove people to podcasts where they can hear a story and make their own determination. And you're right. People love to argue and they love to be trolls. And there's a whole other business and economy behind that. You are absolutely right. Well, Brandon, I appreciate you coming on. Again, we can definitely set this up and have an episode completely about true crime. So I appreciate you, and you take care. All you listeners, don't forget, if you like this, subscribe, give me a review, follow Brandon, read his books, and don't let the day kick your ass. Kick the day's ass.